Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. A Love Unstoppable. Episode 2. Chapter 16. We came home, and I helped Zion change and freshen up, ate, and then we did his homework. I sat next to Zion after tucking him in bed and stroked the side of his face and then bid him good night. Sweet dreams, okay, he nodded, and I leaned in and placed a kiss on his forehead before leaving his room to mine. I had assignments and projects to grade and I had to do them tonight as I would turn them in tomorrow. I entered into bed, wore my glasses, and gathered the papers and books on the nightstand onto my legs. 30 minutes into my grading, I heard my phone buzzing on the nightstand and I reached for it. I saw Dia's ID on the screen and I didn't hesitate to pick it up. "I'm engaged," was the first words that came into my ears, her voice high and glass-shattering. I didn't need to see her to know she was grinning from cheek to cheek. "Oh wow, congratulations! Greg finally decided to put a ring on it." "He did. I'm over the moon with excitement," she squealed. "Have you called your mom and dad?" "Not yet. You were the first person who crossed my mind after I said yes." My heart swells at her words. I have always rooted for them since the first day. Their chemistry was like none other back in university. It wasn't forced, and anyone who saw them could tell their love was genuine. I envied them in a good way and always prayed I find someone that would make me as happy as Greg made Godiya happy. They were both perfectly made for each other and waited until they had attained their dream position in their careers before making the big move. After 6 years of being together, they were engaged now to be married. "I am indeed happy for you, Dia. You both deserve nothing but the best." "Thank you. I believe your knight in shining armor is around the corner," she cooed. My mind raced back to the face I had seen across the road earlier today and chills ran through me. I had done my best to block out all the thoughts in my head and focus mainly on the present. He wasn't there. My mind made him up. "But how can your mind make him up if you haven't been thinking about him, to begin with?" a voice in my head argued. "If he was real, then where did he go? And how did he disappear so fast?" another voice argued. "He had to be an imagination, I couldn't have him be real under any circumstance. I've moved on from it all and my life was fine. I couldn't have him in my life. It had to be an image, one I didn't want to see again." "Are you there, Zara?" I snapped out of my thought to realize I was still on the phone with Dia. "Yeah, I'm sorry I zoned out a bit," I admitted. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice switching tone from worried to concern in a second. I nodded and rubbed my face, then realized she couldn't see me. "I think I saw Aaron Hart today. There were a few changes in his appearance, but he was still the same man. The changes were because of the years gone by and I had those changes as well. I had changed in my appearance and was no longer the size or shape I used to be. I was Kavya. My hair was shorter now and I had them in curls instead of the plain straight they had. My eyes were now ocean blue as to the topaz blue they once were. Career-wise, I was not a student anymore, I was a professor at a prestigious university and at the top of my world. We weren't the same people we were when we met years ago and yet we were. What? Where? And when? Dia's worried tone pulled me back from my wandering mind. I sighed, and my eye fluttered. I took Zion to get ice cream at the Domino restaurant and that's where I saw him standing across the road and staring at me with a grimace on his face. He disappeared a moment later, which was very weird. I was still asking myself to make out the truth about whether he was real or a figment of my imagination. Dia knew about Aaron. She knew about my magical weekend, filled with care and affection and steamy moments. I confessed every detail to her after I returned home from class that faithful Monday. And despite my heartache, I was able to reminisce about the moments we had and admit they were unbelievable. She had my back, like always. She told me she was happy I had a fun-filled weekend, then called him a good-for-nothing for breaking my heart and reminded me I deserved better. You will find someone that would make you happy, she had told me. Maybe I would have already found someone already, but after having Zion, my priorities shifted from relationships to my son. He was my primary focus, and though I'd been on a few dates, none had made it past the first. Daniel was the only one that had persisted so far, but I liked him as a friend and didn't want to compromise our relationship by introducing more to the mix. It's been 5 years since you two met and you live in a different state. I don't think what you saw was the man you were with 5 years ago. I know what I saw, or maybe I didn't. I sighed. I guess you're right, Dia. We should talk about you, not me. Nonsense. If you're not happy, how will I be happy? I smiled, counting myself lucky to have this lady as my friend. I love you, Dia. I love you too, Zara. The call ended, and I clung to my best friend's words. There was no way the one I saw earlier with the man I met 5 years ago. Aaron Hart was in the UK running his many businesses and cuddling the woman of his dream. The last thing he would think about was me. Chapter 17. I gathered the assignment into my hands, grabbed my bag, and locked the car before heading toward my office. You're almost late, I heard the famous voice of Daniel say from behind, and I groaned, not wanting to start a long talk with him this morning about how or why I was almost late. Good morning, Daniel, I tried a calm tone and luckily it worked. Let me help you with that, he offered, but unlike other times, I shook my head. It wasn't his job to lessen my burden, and I didn't want him to get used to it. I'm almost at my office, I pointed out the reason I didn't want his help. Come on. I know you've got this under control and can do it all on your own, but I want to help. Knowing there was no winning for Daniel, I paused and turned to him, clenching hard on the books in my hand. You will not let this rest if I don't give in, will you? I demanded, a frown coming into my face. He grinned. You already know me so well. I handed him the pile of books in my hand and began heading toward the door of my office. So, how was your night? I hope it wasn't as rough as I'm picturing. It was, and I'm still exhausted from it. I answered with a sigh. Yours? It was okay, Mama came to visit. She's still confused about why I haven't found my soulmate yet. I've got a good job and a nice place and I'm not that bad looking. I laughed. Tell Mama she would come around when the time is right. I wish, but she doesn't understand that line, so I will just say because I'm not as charming as she thinks. I chuckled and rolled my eyes, dug my hand into my pocket and pulled out my key as I came to the door. I tried to slip the key into the keyhole, but the door opened of its own accord. That was weird. I remember locking it last night before leaving. This didn't feel right and, glancing at Daniel, I saw he had the same puzzled look on his face. I pushed the door wide, and I stepped into my office, a little skeptical and not wanting to get spooked. It was obvious someone had tampered with my office and who knew what they had done while I was away? This has never happened before and I wondered why now. I thought about who could have broken in. In my 2 years of working at this university, I have tried to maintain a healthy relationship with members of staff from the lowest to the highest. That didn't mean everyone liked me. Only a fool would think that way, but I also did not know who would break in. Perhaps nobody did. You failed to lock up well yesterday while leaving, the voice in my head argued. I took a bold step into my office but stopped in my tracks when I saw none other than Aaron Hart standing in the office. He was waiting with his hands in the pocket of his black trousers, and now that I stepped in, his eyes were on me, staring at me. My heart skipped a beat as once again my worst fear stood before me. I woke up in my room and in bed, and sweat broke over my face. My heart was hammering against my chest at a pace it never had. I was tossed into a state of shock and confusion. More than ever, I felt Aaron's presence, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he found his way back into my life. I turned my attention to the alarm clock on the bed and realized I had overslept and was now an hour behind my waking up time. I have never woken up late since I started taking Zion to daycare. Today, however, I had broken that record for myself, and it wasn't a good one. The grading of the assignment and projects took longer than I expected, and I fell asleep a little past midnight. I had only 5 hours to sleep, and I knew that wasn't enough. My alarm went off 10 minutes past 5 and I thought I snoozed it, but I had turned it off instead. Then I went on to have the nightmare involving Aaron Hart and woke up now. It was already 6:30. Zion, who wasn't a heavy sleeper, thank goodness, woke up after a few taps on his shoulder. I bathed then and got him ready for school. I placed the beep wound on his neck and served him flakes and strawberry, and while he ate, I raced into the room to prepare myself. I battled against the clock to get myself ready in my black trousers and suit. I made my hair into a ponytail. Then I applied a powder brush faintly over my face and wore my perfume. I picked out 3-inch black heels and put them on. Next, I grabbed my red bag, slipped my phone into it and grabbed the project and assignment I had graded last night before going to sleep. I gave myself one last glance in the mirror and, feeling satisfied with the face that stared back at me, I exited my room. "Mommy, pretty!" Zion gushed as soon as he saw me, his eyes lifting. "Thank you, honey. Are you done?" I asked, strolling over to him on the table. He nodded, lifting his plate and showing it to me. It was empty, and that made me happy. "Who's my big boy?" I praised, and his eyes flickered in excitement and he raised both hands. I am. I unlocked the beep from around his neck, wiped his mouth of the few stains on it and helped him onto the floor. I hung his school bag to his back and grabbed his lunch box, which I already had his food and snacks packed in, and handed it to him. He smiled at me because I had handed him his lunch box instead of carrying it myself. He always loved carrying his bag. At first, I thought it was too heavy, but Zion didn't complain the first time he demanded I handed his lunch box to him, and he still hasn't now. Sometimes his physical strength surprises me. "Shall we go?" "Yes, we shall." I waved him off after dropping him at the school and my stomach growled loudly. I didn't have breakfast before I left home because I was already late. That's the price I had to pay. My schedule for the morning was an 8 to 10 a.m. lecture and I had a break for an hour before my next class. I wondered if I'd be able to teach effectively without having a proper breakfast. I had never slacked in my lectures, but there is a first time for everything. I glanced at my wristwatch after I packed the car and I had 5 minutes before my class begins. I hurried through the hallway and towards my office and, unlike in my dream, I didn't see Daniel on the way. I also didn't see Aaron when I opened my office door and stepped in. I finished my first class, and since today already started terribly, I wasn't surprised that my first class went horrible. I couldn't connect with the topic to deliver even though I had gone through it during the weekend, a few days ago. I couldn't connect with the students as well, and they could tell there was something off with me, but they didn't dare ask. I finished the class and walked out towards the university canteen to get food to eat before my next lecture time begins. I saw Daniel standing not so far away, and I knew he was waiting for me. I frowned inwardly, and I wanted to turn around, but I couldn't. I was hungry and needed to eat. I didn't want to talk to him, the reason being that Daniel would ask a lot of questions once he notices I'd had an unsteady day. He was that inquisitive about matters that didn't concern him. I didn't want to answer his questions, and it would not be cool to lose my temper with him. I didn't have the energy for fallout or even a snap. My head hurts. Zara, he began. I held my hand up. Please don't come close with your caring and thousand questions. I don't have the strength for it. He gave me a sad look. Daniel was the noblest of them all. If I wasn't so bent over my misfortune in life, especially with men, perhaps I would have given him a chance. He was a good friend whenever I needed a laugh. He gave advice when I needed, and he was a brilliant listener. Call me a fool, but I had been burnt twice, and I didn't want to get into anything too good to be true. I've never had 1,000 questions before, he said, and I glared at him. I am just concerned. And I just said I don't need it, Aaron. I snapped before I could control myself. His brows furrowed at my words. Who's Aaron? This was what I wanted to avoid. Chapter 18. I didn't answer his question because I couldn't, and so I walked on, not bothered to say a word. He didn't know my story with Aaron. The only one I told it to was Dia, and she was a keeper of secrets. Daniel didn't deserve to know who Aaron was because we didn't have the level of trust in our friendship. I trusted him to an extent, but I'd rather keep things from him, especially my secrets. The least you can do is not ignore me, Zara, he spoke, and I snapped out to see him following me. I paused and turned to him. You need to stop following me, okay? Who's Aaron? Why did you call me Aaron? Aaron is someone I want to leave in the past, and you are driving me nuts just like he had. This was the highest level of truth I could reveal to him. This would also shut him up and keep him from asking any more questions. Keeping him in the dark was best for both of us. He's the one responsible for your lack of trust in men. That would be Owen. Aaron only made it harder, but that's a story for another day. I made my order and took the tray to eat. Unlike what I expected, Daniel didn't leave. He stuck around me, and when I took the food to the lunch table to eat, he followed me. Can I help you with something, Mr. Spears? He stretched both hands out. I just want to sit with you. Is that bad? I eyed him suspiciously but took my seat to eat, and he sat as well. I dug the fork into the fried chips and coated it with a little ketchup before taking it into my mouth. This was what I needed, and I would never skip my breakfast again. The easiest way to do that would be to wake up on time. I felt Daniel's lingering gaze after a while of eating, and it made me feel uncomfortable. What? Nothing. I'm just glad you'll be at the fundraiser. At least I'd have someone to keep me company. I was miserable during the last one. I stopped eating or reasoning after he said fundraiser. What fundraiser? I asked. His gaze narrowed on me. The one holding this Friday. What is it about? Raising funds, he said, making me feel stupid. I rolled my eyes. You know what I mean. The university would have its fundraising event this Friday. It's aimed at increasing the support it gives to the students on scholarship, both Indigenous and international students. He paused from the long speech he was giving to ask, "Did you not get the message? It came in 2 weeks ago, and a reminder came last night to the lecturers group." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through it before turning it around to show me. Indeed, there was an announcement about it and I'm only finding out now. I haven't gone through my phone since I got home yesterday. It's the perks of being a single mother. I rose from the table, already okay with the food, and made my way out. I fetched the key out of my bag and when I tried inserting it into the keyhole, the door opened on its own accord just like it had in my dream. It meant someone could be in my office. It could be Aaron. My heart doubled in its beat and my palms grew sweaty. I dragged a deep breath and gave myself a little courage, but when I stepped in, I saw no one in my office. I glanced around suspiciously, only stopping when I saw Daniel giving me a weird look from the corner of my eyes. I cleared my throat. I will go through the announcement and get all the details. Thank you for informing me, I told him. Are you okay, though? You seem edgier than normal, he asked, his eyes showing concern. I picked up the lecture textbook needed for my next class, tried on my best smile, and nodded. Perfectly fine. So I will go through the message past, but that's after my first class, which would start now. After the class ended, I returned to my office and settled down to go through the announcement posted. I scrolled through the information shared, as well as the reply of a few lecturers at the institution. Just as Daniel said, the information about this fundraiser had been going on for 2 weeks and I didn't take notice. How would I? I barely had enough time to myself with how busy I was. Weekends were barely mine. I wake up cleaning the house and doing the laundry and then making breakfast and bathing Zion. Then I'd move to take him to his music classes and visit the big on weekends. By the time we get home, I am already exhausted, but I still make dinner and get ready for sleep. It was no one's fault. I didn't manage my time well and I will try to do better. The fundraiser was a once-in-4-year event and this was my first time experiencing it. It was scheduled to be on Friday and that is in 2 days, giving me only today and tomorrow to prepare. This fundraiser had been known to the rest who had worked here for over 4 years and I knew a majority of them had already begun their preparation. Unfortunately for me, I hadn't. From the information posted, there were a few notable people who would be in attendance. These people would also raise donations and funds for the event which would facilitate and help the university achieve its goal. The professors, lecturers, and staff of the university were mandated to be in attendance, as that would help encourage equal participation from those donating. My mind flew to many things. One of those was what I'd do with Zion on Friday while I'm at the fundraiser. That was a hard question, but it needed an answer. I'd have to call on favors with Dia and her parents because Daniel was yet to leave rehab. The only other option was to take him along, and that wasn't an option stated in the information passed. I needed to figure out what to wear. From the hints I got from the previous fundraiser, it was a glamour event and everyone would dress to kill and so I had to consider not dressing poorly. As I finish up for the day, I called Dia, asking if she would be free on Friday nights. Hold on. She told me and I knew she was checking her calendar. Yes, I'm free. Why did you ask? I placed the frying pan on the cooker and turned it on. The uni is hosting a scholarship fundraiser and I need someone who would look after Zion while I'm away. I grabbed the bottle of oil and poured it into the pan. I don't mind. She answered, adding, Greg and I would be home watching Netflix. You sure he wouldn't be a problem? Nope, Greg and Zion are buddies and I'm the awkward one, so don't worry. We should be worried about you. What clothes will you wear? What shoes? What style will you wear your hair? These things are important. I would never get over Dia's concerns for me. Most times she worries about me more than she does her fiancé. I already made the selection. Let me forward them to you. I said and sent the picture over to her, and it was marked received that very second. No. No. No, are you kidding me? Babe. Your institution is one of the best out there and they are throwing a fundraiser. That means they are inviting notable people in the city, country, and beyond to the event. You cannot go in there looking like a mother of four who's pretty fed up with life. I rolled my eyes at how dramatic she was being. The dress I picked out is beautiful and says nothing about a mother of four. The oil was hot enough, and I added the already peeled and diced sweet potatoes into it before stepping away from the cooker to concentrate on the call. Dia, those are my choice. Unless you have something better, I won't change my mind. My phone clicked, showing received pictures, and it felt as if she was waiting for me to say those words. I clicked and scanned through to see the 5-inch silver heels, a red bodycon dress that would hug the life out of me, and the hairstyle was a curly bun. She added a silver necklace to the items she sent, and I rolled my eyes. I'm going to the fundraiser to show support for my university, not to slay. You can slay while showing support for your university, she said in a sing-a-song voice. I sighed. All eyes would be on me. As they should. You're gorgeous and smart. It's about time men started noticing you again, don't you think? The only male I'm interested in right now is Zion. He's my priority. Yes, we all know that, but a time will come. He will become independent and will want to move. Times fly, babe, and you can't build your whole life around him and deny yourself a chance at happiness. Fine, I will try, but I still think this outfit is too much, I argued, and she laughed. It's not. You're just too modest. I didn't argue any further. Dia would always win, and there was no point arguing with that. Fine, I surrendered. Good, and so it's settled. I will have Zion and you will have the time of your life. Chapter 19. The next few days flew faster than I expected, and soon it was Friday. I had one class with my students, and after I closed up for the day, the next step was to pick up Zion from school. Just like every day as I stepped out of the block, Daniel was already waiting for me to see me off to my car. Are you ready for the night ahead? He asked, sounding too eager and making me raise a brow at him. I can't say no, can I? I raised a brow. You can't, Ms. Adams. This is an only yes answer, he chuckled. Then yes I am, I answered. And Zion, his concern always seemed to warm my heart. It could be because he's expecting to get a chance with me someday, but it was always nice and comforting whenever he'd ask after Zion. He did more than some family members did. He would be with Dia. I already made plans. He nodded impressed, that's good. For a moment, I wondered what it would be like to give us a chance. He was a great guy with a big heart. I've known him for 2 years and his care for me has never fluttered despite knowing he might never have a chance. Thanks for your concern, though. Perhaps this was something to think about and not push away. After picking Zion up from school, we came home and made dinner while he did the weekend homework. After dinner, I gave him a warm shower and changed him into nice sleeping wear and packed a few others of his clothes into his handout bag. I added a few snacks to his bag and his iPod to play with in case he got bored before sleeping time. Once all was in place, I raced into my room to get ready. The fundraiser would kick off at 9 p.m. but members of staff at the university were to be present, with 8:30 p.m. being the latest for us. It was currently 7, and I had an hour and 30 minutes to get ready. After showering, I brought out the outfit Dia had ordered a few days ago, which came in yesterday, and I changed into it. It was a perfect bodycon that highlighted the curves I had. Its color flattered my skin, and I knew that despite her choice being prompt, she had thought it through. The dress flowed down my legs but had cutting up to the mid-thigh. The silver heels made my legs appear longer than they usually looked and brought me from my 5 feet 3 inches to 5 feet 8 inches. I dug my hand into the shopping bag and pulled out the small crystal clutch, which was an additional touch to the already amazing outfit. Dia wouldn't tell me how much she spent to get this, but I knew it had cost her a lot. I sat before the dressing mirror and applied light makeup to my face. A little blush, mascara, and eyeliner did the trick. Then I made my curly blonde hair into a bun, letting a few strands fall over my face. I brought out my silver necklace and placed it around my neck. I rose to my feet and glanced at my wristwatch and I saw I had 30 minutes before 8:30. I was now on the clock. As much as looking good was important, going early was also important. The doorbell went off, and I knew that was Dia. Good thing I was already set for the night. I dragged a few deep breaths and reached for my long black coat before walking out of my room. I came to the living room and opened the door. Dia and Greg stood before me and I watched their eyes lit up at the sight of me and I felt giddy. Wow, gushed Dia, and I rolled my eyes. I mean, I thought you would slay the night, but I think you're just going to steal it away at this point, she said as they stepped into the house. Is it too much? I asked, my voice getting low with worry. No. Dia exclaimed. No. Greg said at the same time. It's perfect. Don't even think of having a second thought, she scolded. Then her eyes grew soft, and she placed her hand on my shoulder. You're just gorgeous. Thank you, and thank you for picking it out for me. She beamed. You're welcome. Zion is inside, I'll get him and his bag out, I told them, hurrying away to the room. I returned with Zion, whom I had already informed ahead of time that he would stay at Dia's place for the night. He had no issues with that. Thank goodness. His iPod is in there and his meds, his snacks, and clothes. I handed Dia the bag, but Greg collected it instead. Don't worry, he'll be fine, she assured me. I nodded. This was the first time Zion would sleep over at anyone's place and I wanted him comfortable. I stooped down to stare at the rather quiet boy. Kisses for mommy. He nodded and leaned in, placing a kiss on my cheek. I kissed his forehead before we all walked out of the room. Take lots of pictures, Dia yelled as they drove off and I waved back, making the promise under my breath. I entered my car and drove off towards the Sheraton hotels and towers where the fundraiser was being held. I made my way inside and got onto the elevator, going up to the 6th floor, the event floor. I glanced at my wristwatch to see I had 10 more minutes before 8:30. I came early after all. That was a good thing. The elevator door opened, and I stepped out to see the floor already filled with many familiar faces, especially from the university. I caught sight of Daniel with a few professors and when his eyes caught mine, a smile came onto his face. He didn't take his eyes away from me even as he spoke to the men, and this made them turn to see who he gawked at and they found me. Their eyes also lit up, and I wondered if I was too dressed up for the night. Dia had told me I wasn't, but the look on their faces seemed to say otherwise. There was no dress code given, but I knew we had to be decent, which my outfit was. There was no limitation placed on the level of elegance and that's on them. Daniel soon left the men he spoke to and approached me with long strides, and this is the fastest I've seen him move. He stood before me in a matter of seconds with an awestruck look on his face as he beheld me. He began, but I didn't let him finish. Too much, my skepticism kicked in. His eyes widened, and he shook his head. It's perfect. You look so beautiful, and I hope I'm the first guy saying that tonight. You are, I told him. His eyes warmed up, and a smile came onto his face. He paused his lips and took me in from head to toe. Wow, I mean just wow. You're going to be the talk of the night and the weeks to follow. Since he already told me the outfit was perfect, I took his words as a compliment instead and didn't worry about being too much. Thank you, Daniel. You're welcome. The event kicked off at exactly 9 p.m. despite all the guests not being present yet. I knew that because the hall had round tables with names tagged on each table and those tables were empty. Here, you will take the welcoming speech, Martha said, handing me a piece of paper. I can't do it. She didn't look pleased with my response. Can't is a hard word, Ms. Adams. Would you rather take the book auctioning? She raised the 2 books in her hand. Professor Lawrence, a professor in literature at the university, had published them. These were the 2 works he had worked on in the last 3 years, and I know this because Daniel told me. I, however, didn't know how bidding worked. I frowned. I'm a professor in medicine. I am not an auctioneer, Mrs. Martha Eula. I knew Martha shared little likeness for me, but doing this told me she might just hate me more than I thought. Then the welcoming speech it is, she said flatly, as if not expecting any more interruption from me. Can't someone else do it? I asked, and I was so close to losing it. She flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The honor of giving the welcome speech usually goes to the staff dressed the best each year. So that was why heads turned when I worked in, not because they thought I looked great, but because they knew I'd be the scapegoat. I can't do this. I need to speak to management. Young lady, you need to stop using can't less and can more. And I am the management. She shoved the paper at me before walking away. I turned and caught Daniel's eyes on me, and I glared at him. He was in on it and left me in the dark, open, and vulnerable. He got up from his seat and approached me in the hallway, where I stood chewing on my bottom lips angrily. You're pissed, he stated the obvious. As I should be. I bit out. I'm sorry. I should have said something. What are you going to do now? His brow rose at me. I groaned. I don't know, I have to do it, I guess. It's just a speech. I just think there should be a way to inform everyone about something rather than slamming it on them at the last minute. To say I was pissed was the very least way to put it. The more we moved into the events of the night, the more the guest kept coming. The professors at the university all sat at the front roll table while the guest took the other seats around the table having their names on them. 1 hour after the event kicked off, the hall was almost filled and different programs had already taken place, from the opening remarks taken by Ms. Martha Eula to the history of Stanford University taken by Professor Yates. Daniel Spears took the Scholarship Foundation. History would take the opening announcement, which was the next thing before the welcome speech according to the program schedule. Unlike what I initially thought, every member of staff had a role to play tonight, some more than others, but it didn't diminish the role we all had to play. I still wished I had gotten the first speech, which was the briefing. When that speech was given, there were fewer people in the hall. Now, the guest appeared full and all the guests had arrived. Sadly, this was what I got and all eyes will be on me. How amazing! Daniel nodded at the host of the night, Mr. Carville, before handing the mic over to him. The crowd applauded, and he climbed down the stage to take his seat next to me. You're next, he informed me, as if I didn't already know that. I don't want to be. I groaned and my eyes fluttered. The next person I'd like to invite to the stage is a young lady. Do not underestimate her because she's also record-breaking, smart, and beautiful. In her 2 years of being at the university, she had shaped and touched the lives of so many. She's broken 2 records, and she's still aiming for more. Without no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Zara Adams as she takes the welcoming speech. My heart doubled a beat at the sound of my name, and Daniel briefly squeezed my hand before letting go. I rose to my feet, making heads turn to me in the large halls. Goosebumps scattered all over my body, but I willed myself to keep moving. I clutched down on the piece of paper in my hand and wore a wide smile. I climbed up to the stage and shook hands with the host before turning to the crowd. My gaze traveled over the many faces and raced to the front when it caught the face of someone seated in the hall that seemed familiar. I paused and my eyes traveled back to the direction it just ran past, and there he was, seated in a black suit and red tie. Aaron Hart. Chapter 20. My heart doubled a beat when my eyes returned to rest on him, and I found him watching me, but unlike others, he wasn't clapping, he was just watching me intently, like I owed him, like I took something that was his. I wasn't hallucinating when I saw him at the restaurant many days ago. Seeing him here today told me what I had seen was him. He was there that afternoon, watching me like he was doing now. He looked the same way he did when I had seen him at Domino restaurants and also in my dream. He had longer hair length and trimmed beards unlike 5 years ago, but didn't look to have aged a bit since then. His appearance now meant I was no longer safe with my son. 5 years ago, I said goodbyes to him and thought I would never see him again, but here he was at the place I least expected. This was my nightmare becoming a reality, and there was nothing I could do. "Zara, they are waiting for you," the host whisper yelled at me, forcing me back into the reality of my surroundings to know I wasn't in the room with Aaron alone, but with over 100 others. I couldn't let him have control over my mind. I had to focus on the task at hand. I dragged a deep breath, and once again, I forced a smile. A low applauding started from the corner of the room, and I knew it was Daniel doing. It was his way of encouraging me, and it worked. In a few seconds, the hall echoed with rounds of applause. This fueled my confidence as I stared down at the speech typed out on the paper before me. I lifted my head with much confidence, nodding my appreciation to him before facing the crowd. I cleared my throat. "Thank you for the encouragement. I haven't done this before, so pardon my sudden stage fright," I said, letting out a small giggle. "But thanks for giving me the platform and having confidence and faith that I can deliver," I spoke, making sure I avoided the corner where I had spotted Aaron a while ago and knew he sat. "Welcome everyone to the Hand of Hope fundraiser. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so honored to have you take time out to be here. A lot of you had busy days and tight schedules, and so it is an honor to have you here. We will not forget to mention our partners who flew across countries and states to be here with us tonight. Know that we appreciate all your effort. The need to give one more student all he or she needs to advance in education keeps us going. With your donation 4 years ago, we were able to grant scholarships to over 40 students, foreign and domestic combined. And 120 educational aids to others." Loud applause went through the crowd, and when the clapping ceased, I continued. "On behalf of over 160 students whose lives your generosity affected positively in the last 4 years, we want to say thank you. With our voice as one, we welcome you to the 10th fundraiser hosted by Stanford University. We encourage you to feel at home, and we have so many entertainments lined up just for you. Once again, welcome and have a great night ahead." With this said, I rounded up my speech and exited the stage. I could feel the intense gaze of Aaron on me as I made my way towards my seat, but I did not give him the satisfaction of looking at him. I had done the task given to me, and the next was how to make it through the night in one piece. Aaron's presence wasn't a good thing. It didn't take a genius to know that, and his presence threatened a lot of things in my life. "Your hands are shaking." Daniel, who sat beside me, spoke, and I glanced down to find my hands trembling. I wrapped my second hand around it, but it didn't help. Instead, they both continued shaking. "Well, will you look at that?" I chuckled, not knowing what else to do at this point. Without warning, Daniel placed his hand on mine and they felt warm and calming. The trembling of my hands reduced, and I glanced up at him and found him holding onto a smile. This made me smile as well. The applause that went off made us look away, but I didn't pull away from his touch. I looked to the stage and found Mr. Keffa's Cruz there, about to begin the auctioning of the books Martha had given me earlier. At Stanford, we always have the back of our own, and that's what we are doing here tonight. I heard him say. We all begin with the first literary work, The Wolf Who Cried Sheep. I'll start bidding from $3. A hand went up for $3 and he moved on to $6 and another hand moved up and so he kept moving until he got to $500. "Is there a buyer at $1,000? He asked, his eyes scanning the crowd seated. "No buyer." $1,000, the voice I would know anywhere spoke up, raising his pile card. My eyes traveled over to him, and our gaze locked. I dragged a deep breath once again. I felt affected by him. I quickly recovered myself and turned away from him. $1,000. Do I hear $2,000 for The Wolf Who Cried Sheep? $2,000, another yelled from the back. $2,000. Can we get $4,000? $4,000, Aaron said. $4,000. Is there anyone going up to $8,000? Kefas asked, scanning around the hall, but no further bidding came. Going once, going twice against, sold to the gentleman at the third roll, he said, and knew he meant Aaron. Then he moved to the second book and, just like the first, he gave a quick remark about it before moving to the bid, which started at $10. Once again Aaron showed off and proved himself over the rest guest seated. Unlike the first, the second bidding went up to $20,000, but in the end, Aaron bought it. My hands had stopped trembling and Daniel released them, and I thanked him. I didn't let the night end before I took my leave. I didn't want to run into Aaron or have a talk with him. When Daniel asked what was wrong, I told him I was unwell, and though I declined his offer to take me home at first because I wasn't unwell, I ended up accepting and handing him my car keys. I picked up my clutch as the Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Frankie Mori, gave the appreciation speech. He thanked the guest who had honored the invitation they received from the university and the professors who had dedicated their time and effort to see the success of the night. Daniel told me to go to the car while he informed the organizers about my state of health before leaving. I nodded and made my way out and towards the elevator when I heard, "Leaving already?" I turned around and found none other than Aaron behind me. Chapter 21. It wasn't my imagination I could snap out of, nor was it a dream I could wake up from. I couldn't pretend that he wasn't here either, because he was here with me. This was real. Aaron Hart stood closer to me than ever. I could feel his heated gaze watching my every move, wanting to see my next reaction. I turned from the elevator to face him and found a look on his face I couldn't figure out. "Zara Adams," his deep hoarse voice called out like we had cause to settle, and shivers ran down my spine. His voice had been my downfall in the past, and even now, it still was. "You look amazing," he said, and his eyes dragged over my body like it was on full display for him. "Indeed, the years have been kind." I swallowed. I left him in the past 5 years ago, and ever since then, I had avoided any and everything that would bring him back into my life. Now here he was, standing before me and staring me dead in the face like he could see my very soul. I needed to gather my courage and face the reality before me. There was no other choice. I've hidden away for too long. Mr. Aaron Hart. It's nice to know that after 5 long years, you still remember my name, he said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. I mean, I screamed the name all day during that faithful weekend, so it would be hard to forget. My cheeks heat, not at what he just said, but at the profane thought in my head, what do you want? I asked, not loving the idea of him calling the shots and messing with my mind. You should be back in the hall with the others. He ignored my words and instead asked, is he your boyfriend? I knew who he was. I had stepped out of the hall with Daniel. He probably had his eyes on me the whole time while wondering who the man that led me out was. I scoffed at his audacity because I didn't see how that concerned him. I don't see how that's any of your business. What do you want? I asked again, my patience growing thin. I needed to know his business, I needed to know what he knows so I can choose my battle wisely. You're already on the attack. He pointed out, taking a step forward, and bringing himself closer to me, but I have done nothing to trigger that. My eyes widened. You have done nothing? How about stalking me? I saw you last week, watching me. I thought I had hallucinated then, but now I know I didn't. Yet you can't seem to understand why I am on the attack. It's not stalking. It was a harmless attempt to rekindle with an old friend. I didn't let him finish. I am not your friend. We were two people who had heated moments over the weekend. That's it, nothing more, nothing less. It was more, and you know that, he argued, taking another step forward, and my heart skipped a beat. I saw it in your eyes, Zara. I have moved past the event of that week long ago, but his words just forced the memory back into my head. I remembered it like it was yesterday. I remembered how he had him on my back, on my hands and knees, moaning, crying and reaping excess and writhing from too much pleasure. I pulled myself back to reality and cleared my throat, not failing to notice the smirk lingering on his face. My body seemed to be on fire and singular reactions surged through me. That's in the past and I've moved on from it. It doesn't seem like you have. Your heart is skipping at an alarming rate. Your blood is rushing through your veins at a pace you never expected and shivers are surging down south, just at the very thought of the weekend we had. So no, I don't think it's the past. I bite down on my lips. He shouldn't know what he knows and somehow he did, and it terrified me. The only good news in all of this was, that he didn't know about Zion, at least if he did, he would have asked who the child I was holding onto at the restaurant was, but so far he hadn't, which told me he had no clue. We can leave now, Daniel said, walking toward me. And only slowed down when he took notice of Aaron standing close to me. I turned my attention to Daniel and smiled at him. Good, then let's go, I said and turned to the elevator, uttering no other word to Aaron, who stood silently watching me go. I gave the men no time to meet and greet because I couldn't afford that. I was grateful that Daniel had walked in when he did because Aaron had had me backed up against the wall with his words. I had no response to escape. He had the upper hand, and he knew it too. Daniel's interruption was the saving grace I needed. Are you okay? Daniel asked as we entered the car and fastened the seat belts. I had uttered no words since we left Aaron in the hallway and I knew it was only a matter of time before that sparked Daniel's curiosity. I shook my head, I'm fine. His eyes lingered on me, and I knew he didn't buy my answer. Are you sure? I flashed him a small, genuine smile. Yes, I am fine. Forging my way ahead had been the thought that had clouded my mind since I left Aaron over 5 minutes ago and I still hadn't found a way forward. That was not the last of him. I knew that this was the very beginning. This man seemed to be on a mission and I was entwined in it somehow. Chapter 22. The organizers held a meeting the week that followed and headed by the Vice-Chancellor, Toby Akindele, used it to thank everyone at the university who dedicated their time and effort to see the success of the fundraiser. According to their report, this year's fundraiser was twice the revenue of the last, making it the most successful they have had since they started. It was an excellent step in the right direction for the university. Being part of the movement gave me a sense of pride, and knowing I helped made education easier for someone made me happy. My joy, however, decreased when I learned the largest donator for the night was Mr. Aaron Hart, with over 200,000 spent in the night. This also differed from his other pledges during the many events that took place. I saw everyone cheer, and though I felt happy because this was something good for the university, it wasn't good for me. I knew who Aaron was, and I knew what his presence meant, so even while others cheered and clapped, I didn't. I noticed Daniel's keen gaze on me from the back where he sat, watching what took place with those seated in the meeting hall. He had walked in on my moment with Aaron and knew my lack of response to the good news must have had something to do with it. He was drawing his conclusion, and it was only a matter of time before he reached it. The meeting was soon adjourned, and I exited the hall to start my day at work. Since we already spent the first 30 minutes of work on this meeting, I now had an hour and 30 minutes left for my first lecture. I had so much to cover, and the end of the semester drew closer with every passing day. It wasn't a surprise that Daniel followed behind me as I made my way through the hallway that led to my office. My colleague was wired with an acute need to check up on me, and it was both a blessing and a curse. "Daniel, good morning," I said with a bright smile as he caught up with me. "Good morning, Zara. How are you doing?" I slowed down. "Very well, thank you. And your health?" "Much better, thank you. And thank you for taking me home that night, even when you didn't have to. You are a lifesaver." I smiled at him. "You're welcome." He gave me a noble smile that I found charming. "I'm sorry I couldn't call or visit over the weekend. I had a lot of family meetups." I shook my head. "You don't owe me any explanation, Daniel, you already did a lot by taking me home." I stopped talking when my eyes caught sight of Aaron Hart walking toward us. Everything around me stopped for the moments that passed as though a god was gracing us with his presence. With each step he took, he did with grace, and he moved around like he owned the place. He made my heart skip and didn't have to do a thing. I should have expected his presence. Being the highest donor of the night would give him some special privileges. One of those would be his involvement in the affairs of the university towards the spending of the fund. In other words, I had to get used to seeing his face for the next few weeks to come. That's how I was told things would go. Yet, I didn't prepare for it, and that was on me. I told Dia about my encounter at the fundraiser, and though my first plan was to run with my son, she told me that wasn't the best option. I realized she was right. Running would mean starting all over with my son in a new place. Also, I hadn't saved up enough money to help me do that in the last 2 years. His three-piece navy blue suit did justice to his already perfect features. His hair tied into a ponytail and his beard groomed and neat made him look enduring. Thinking about it now, I should have gone with my first thought, because facing problems hasn't been my strongest point. Not when he affected me in ways I could not control. Not when he knew the effect he had on me. His eyes met mine and, just like days ago at the fundraiser, my heart skipped a beat. He must have heard, because I could swear I saw a smirk cross the corner of his lips. I shouldn't be this affected by him, especially since, unlike the other night, we weren't alone, but Aaron's effect didn't care if I was alone or in the crowd. It hit hard every time. The hallway grew silent as he got to where we were, and we stood like three dumb people. Aaron's eyes lingered on me, and though I tried to break it off and speak, I failed the first few tries as if I was under some form of compulsion to remain silent. "Leave us," he commanded like he spoke to his servant. I knew he spoke to Daniel, even though his eyes didn't sway from mine. Daniel didn't move. Instead, he turned to me and I saw the worried look on his face from the corner of my eyes. Daniel might not be as tall or built as Aaron, but I have seen him fight, and he fights dirty. When I first got my job, he offered to take me out to celebrate at the bar in the heart of the city. There, we ran. Long story short, Daniel launched at the men who used profane words on me. And though he took quite a beating, he came out victorious. Still, I didn't want him to have a fallout with Aaron. It wasn't a sight I wanted to see. He was important to the university, and that meant he was important to us, and falling out with him might get us both in trouble. Aaron Hart seemed like one that would easily unleash hell on earth and have no remorse about it. With Aaron's presence, Daniel's suspicion would skyrocket, and he would probably figure there was a history between us. He was smart that way. "It's fine," I said to Daniel, who looked anything but convinced. This made me turn to him, adding, "I promise, Daniel. It's fine." He nodded, yet his reluctance lingered even as he stepped away to give us privacy. As soon as Daniel was far away, my eyes returned to fix on Aaron, blank of any reaction. I tightened my grip around the handbag in my hand. "Mr. Aaron Hart, good morning." I had gotten much control over the stupid reaction of my body, and I felt much better. "You sound so formal," he pointed out. The last time we spoke, I specifically told him we were not friends because we weren't. The only relationship that should exist between us should be formal because that's what the university needed. As I should be. Your contributions to the fundraiser would go a long way in aiding the university. I wanted to think he had donated from the goodness of his heart, but I had high doubts about it. This was his way of keeping himself in my life and ruining everything I've worked hard to build. Or this was him just trying to be a nice person and help make education easier for those who need it. Not everything has to be about you, Zara. I did not remember falling out with you in the time we spent together, so I don't understand why you're cold towards me. Of course, he wouldn't. Wrongdoers barely remember those they wrong, but it's not the case for those wronged. I'm not cold, Mr. Hart, just being formal as I should be. Chapter 23. His eyes flickered as he stared at me as if trying to figure something out. Whatever he searched for, he didn't see. At least, not before we got interrupted. "Ah! There he is. I thought you wouldn't make it," the Vice-Chancellor, Mr. Toby Akindeely, said, coming in from behind and offering him his hand for a shake. Aaron's attention shifted from me over to the middle-aged man and a smile came onto his face. "Good morning, Mr. Akindeely." They shook hands. "Good morning, Mr. Hart." Mr. Akindeely turned his attention to me. "This is Aaron Hart," he told me. "Mr. Aaron Hart, this is Zara Adams." Aaron beat him to the introduction, and that made him raise a brow of interest. "You two know each other?" While I moved to say, "We met at the fundraiser," Aaron said, "We have a bit of history, at the same time." Well, I didn't think this would go well, and so far it hasn't. "Okay, that's good then," Mr. Akindeely said, brushing what Aaron had just said off lightly. It wasn't good, but it would be less complicated if he thought so. He met with everyone after the fundraiser on Friday. "You left earlier, so he didn't get to meet you finally." Mr. Hart would visit the university from time to time in the coming months, as you already know. We also expect every staff at the university to give their total cooperation in achieving this year's goal, he explained. Yes, sir, I will do my best to, I answered, and he smiled warmly at me. Mr. Toby took Aaron into his office to continue whatever discussions they had, and I hurried over to my first class. I taught the students and forged my way on with the lecture the best way I could. The last person I wanted to find at my door as I ended my first lecture was Daniel. I wished I had magical powers to make him go away, but alas, I didn't. I opened the door to my office, and I stepped in without uttering a word. I set my bag on the desk and I heard the door close from behind, telling me he was also inside. My mind wandered to where I could start. I needed a cover-up story, one that he would believe without having a doubt. All those thoughts disappeared when I heard him ask. Aaron Hart is Zion's father, isn't he? His voice already sounded certain of the answer. I raised a brow as I spun around to meet him. What makes you say that? He walked past me and picked up the small framed picture on my desk and showed it to me. It was a picture of Zion and me, taken 3 months ago at the museum. He had the biggest smile visiting there for the first time, and I wanted to have the memory. When the photographer came over to us and asked if we wanted our pictures taken, I couldn't say no to him. Zion had a grin that brought his dimple out and made his hazel eyes flicker adorably. I had my arms wrapped around him while staring at him in the picture. My eyes dropped as the picture answered my question, and I knew lying and pretending would get me nowhere. He doesn't know, does he? I bit my lips and shook my head. He doesn't, I replied with a small voice. I didn't think we'd ever meet again, and I didn't want him back in my life. So I kept him out of Zion's. I'm a horrible person, but I was scared. Do you still love him? The word love echoed in my ears. I don't love him. I didn't even love him to begin with. What we had were fleeting emotions and infatuated reactions. It wasn't real, and I have told myself that every time I have thought back to those times. I never loved him, Daniel. We spent a weekend together, and that was it. He flashed me a smile. I think you have told yourself that for so long that you believe that's the truth. I don't know what happened between you two, but it shows in your voice that it was more than mere fleeting feelings. I don't need a shrink. I groaned. Fine, I might have given my heart to him, but I wasn't what he wanted. So, I snapped out of the madness and decided to put myself first. So you no longer love him? I don't, and I'd appreciate you keep what you know about Zion to yourself. Can you do that for me, at least until I'm ready to tell him? He nodded, adding, it's not my secret to spill. I smiled, feeling at ease, but knowing safety was now very far away. Besides, now I know why I'd never measure up. His words made me stare at him, confused. Why? Aaron Hart set the standards of men you should be with, and that's above where I can reach. I stepped toward him. Never sell yourself short. You're as good enough as Aaron Hart. The heart is the most important thing at the end of the day. His smile was small, and there was a happy flicker in his brown eyes. Thank you. He leaned in, closing the space between us and kissing my lips, taking me by surprise. I kissed back before I could stop myself. My arms wrapped around his neck and I deepened the kiss and pulled him closer. I moaned when he wrapped his arms around my waist, moving it up to my back and squeezing the flesh there. He let go after a while and pulled away, placing his forehead against mine while we both caught our breath. I am sorry if I took you by surprise. I just couldn't help it after you said those nice words. I licked over my bottom lips and smiled, still dragging deep breaths. Don't be sorry. I liked it and I like you. I think you're a nice guy. I'm just not sure I can give you what you want. My life is at the point where nothing is certain and I don't think it would be fair to add a relationship to the mix. So yes, I like you, but I don't know if that's enough." He grinned and stroked the side of my face, making me shiver at his touch. "Only one way to find out." Again he leaned in and took my lips between his for another round of heated kiss, and it made me smile. Maybe giving another try to love wouldn't be such a bad idea. Chapter 24. There was silence in the next few weeks that followed. I had initially thought Aaron's presence at the fundraiser or the university would set my world upside down, but as it turned out, it didn't. I saw him a few times after that day, but only in professional settings, which came as a relief to me and everything around me. Still, I couldn't take chances. Dia made a schedule for picking Zion up from school, and in the last few weeks, we have all stuck to it. From Monday through Fridays, each person was assigned to pick him up and take him to their place until evening, and I'd go over to pick him up and bring him home. The only days I had to pick him up were Fridays because both Dia and her parents were busy on that day. Lionel got discharged from the rehabilitation hospital last week and he was slowly getting back into the outside world. Although I could fit him into this schedule, I knew it was best to leave him out for now. With Aaron being out of the picture for the last few weeks, I could conclude that he would soon return to the United Kingdom where he belonged once the university collaboration completes, and that's in a few more weeks. Daniel and I have been moving on with our relationship, and at first, I was skeptical and unsure about everything, but every day he makes it worth it. He always made me smile because of the little things he did, and he was happy only when I was happy. I also wanted him happy. Everything was falling into place, and I was grateful for it all. A slight knock came on my office door to disrupt my attention. My head lifted from the few projects I was currently assessing to see Daniel poking his head through with a smile on his face. "Hey," he called out. "Hey," I smiled, dropping the pen in my hand in the book and closing it. He stepped into the office. "You seem busy." His eyes scanned over the document on my desk before returning to mine. "The perks of being a professor at Stanford University." I chuckled, and he smiled. He strode over to me and settled on the desk, trapping my legs between his. "I came in to see how you are doing, and from what I see, I'll say you're very well, beautifully well." I kept my eyes fixed on him. "Are you complimenting my work or me?" Both. He leaned in and kissed my forehead, sending shivers down my spine. He moved his lips over my nose, pecking it and then moving down to take my lips between his. I sighed into the kiss, knowing I needed this today. I needed him, and so I relaxed against him. I can't believe I denied myself this man for so long because I was afraid I would give too much and neglect Zion. We have been together this 3 weeks, and this has been my happiest, and I wanted it to last. His hand hardened to his touch and a light moan tore through my throat. Despite dating in the past few weeks and also going on a few dates, we have taken everything at a slow pace. He was being a nobleman, and I didn't want to rush into anything with him, including intimacy. Our pace was fine with me, and it gave me time to think about other things, including work, my son who would always come first, and my friends and loved ones. My phone went off on the desk. I reached into my bag and pulled out the phone, only to see Mrs. Edwin Loretta's ID on the screen. I sat up properly and cleared my throat before picking up the call and placing the phone to my ear. "Hello, Mrs. Loretta." I greeted her with an unsure voice because Zion had been in her class for close to a year now and she had never called me at this time, coupled with the fact that this wasn't even close to closing hours. It gave me room for concern. "Good day, Ms. Adams. I am sorry to call and bother you, but we will need you to come to the school as soon as you can." "Is there something wrong?" I asked, already standing on my feet. Zion was in a fight and badly hurt the boy he fought with, she said, and my heart sank in my chest. He's in Mrs. Paula Williamson, the headmistress's office now, and they are waiting for you. I will be there as soon as I can, I said and ended the call. I slipped the phone into my bag, which sat on the desk, and picked it up. That was when I noticed Daniel still in my office and my sadness grew in multiple folds. I opened my mouth to speak, but he beat me to it. If this is about Zion, he cupped my face and smiled. You don't have to feel bad for leaving. He kissed my forehead tenderly before stepping back. This is one reason I can't get enough of this man. His level of maturity and understanding was higher than most. I knew I had found myself a rare gem and I wonder why it took so long. Thank you. Chapter 25. I drove over to the school as fast as I could and it surprised me I didn't get pulled over by the cops for overspeeding all the way here. I guess the odds were in my favor. The one thing on my mind was Zion, my son, who had displayed violent traits, something he had never done since he was a child. I tried to think of any reason that would have led him to be so violent he'd take another kid to the school clinic. I didn't mean to cast blame, but all my mental fingers pointed at me. Perhaps I missed clues and hints on how to deal with him and this side of him. I missed the clues. I didn't raise him in a toxic environment and I raised him to always be good. Always be kind in his affairs with others. I taught him what right and wrong were and ensured to the best of my knowledge that he followed the right path. Maybe he was responding to the change which had taken place in the last few weeks. Not only did I almost stop picking him up from school, but I also started dating Daniel. Maybe, in my quest to find happiness in this new relationship, I had neglected my number one priority and failed woefully. This was my fault, and I had to do better. I needed to speak to him and his class teacher as well as the boy he had hurt. I feared how badly the boy's state was and how this might scar him for life. His parents would be mad at Zion for harming their son that way. Any parent would be. I raced into the school and made my way into the nursery department, and entered Ms. Edwin's classroom. She saw me and her eyes showed concern, already seeing the stress and guilt on my face. I didn't hide how I felt about the whole situation. I couldn't. Ms. Adams, I am sorry we had to pull you out of work. She began saying, walking towards me. I shook my head. She didn't have to be sorry. It was my responsibility as a parent to be there for my son. She had already done her job as a teacher and I appreciated it. It's fine. How's the other boy? Gabriel is fine. The nurses said he suffered a mild concussion, but he will be fine, she assured me. A concussion wasn't something I'd call mild no matter what, and I dreaded the answer to my next question. What happened? I'd never known Zion to be the violent type since he was a boy. So far, everything has come as a shock to me. Zion is a sweet boy, but even the sweetest can become vicious if pushed to it, she said. She then moved to narrate what had happened to me. During playtime, we assigned every child sets of toys to play with according to what they like. Gabriel took Zion's toys despite having his, and then when Zion got another, he came back to take it and Zion would not give it to him. I came and told Gabriel to leave Zion alone, but when I turned to attend to the other kids, he had gone after Zion again and smacked him in the face twice. Zion pushed him off him to protect himself and he tripped and hit his head on the wall. I should have stepped up in time, but I had my hands filled with Shamsi and Yolanda, who were learning how to share. Before I could intervene with the boys' conflict, the deed was done. She barely finished speaking when a man and woman in their late 30s stormed into the classroom looking angry and worried. "Where is our son?" the woman with the long curly brunette demanded in a high-pitched voice, making the kids in the classroom turn to her. Calm down, Mrs. Jones, Loretta stepped towards her. She cast a glare at Loretta, angry that she had interrupted her. Calm down? My son is in a terrible state because some little demon shoved him violently, she spoke down on Loretta. My ears rang at her accusations and name-calling of my son in front of the class where pupils who were friends with Zion sat, and I couldn't take it. I spoke up. You need to calm down and not make conclusions when you don't know the entire story. She turned her attention to me, the belittling look she had on her face when she spoke to the class teacher lingering. And who are you? I am Zara Adams. I am Zion's mother, the student who had a fallout with your son. Her face reddened, and if looks could kill, I'd be dead. So you're the mother of the little monster that attacked my son. I dragged a deep breath. My son is not a monster. He's a sweet boy, and perhaps if you had raised your son to be contented with what he had and not go after other people's stuff and turn violent when he doesn't get it, then maybe my son wouldn't have pushed him off. I was never one to condone violence for any reason, but judging from this woman's attitude, it was so hard to deal with all her craziness, especially when she was using all these horrible names on Zion. That, added to the story Loretta had told me, I cannot help but unleash on her. She gasped and surged towards me, but I didn't back away. I would not let Mrs. My son is better than everyone else and deserves to get her way with oppressing me. Loretta stepped in between us and held both arms out before the brawl could take place. You two need to stop. She yelled, and the angry mother of Gabriel shoved Loretta's hands away and stepped back, crossing her arms over her chest. Where is my son? She demanded. He's in the school clinic, Loretta answered, and without waiting to be shown direction, Mrs. Jones stormed out, and her husband, who had been silent all the while, followed behind her. Loretta turned to me, her eyes flickering with empathy. I'm sorry she said that about Zion. You're right. He is a sweet boy. I will show you to Mrs. Paula Wilson's office. She offered, but I shook my head, knowing something else was important. The angry parent who just left with her husband needed her help more. No, I can find my way. Please see to Mr. and Mrs. Jones and make sure they don't miss their way to the clinic. I don't want them losing their temper on the poor nurse. Her smile came warm. It's so considerate of you. She spoke to the assistant teacher before leaving the room, and I also departed for Mrs. Wilson's office. On getting there, I knocked on the door and received a beckon from the feminine voice on the inside to enter. I opened and stepped into the office, and I saw Zion seated on the chair facing Mrs. Wilson, who was writing something in the book which was before her on the desk. He had his back turned to me, his head lowered and his arms folded across his chest. Her head lifted as soon as she saw me. She seemed to know who I was. Good day, Mrs. Wilson, I greeted, stepping into the office. Zion's head whipped around as soon as he heard my voice and, unlike the usual cheerful look he used to have on his face, he had a somewhat terrified one. I had raised him to know that I will not applaud him when he does what was wrong, and I could tell he knew I would not agree with what he did. I understand why he did what he did, but I would not make him feel it was acceptable to hurt anyone, no matter what. Ms. Adams, it's so nice for you to join us. Please come seat, Paula smiled and beckoned to me. I walked to the chair next to the one Zion sat on and took a seat as well. I know how difficult it must have been, having to leave your work and come over here. I offered her a small smile, but shook my head. I met with Mrs. Edwin and she told me everything. I just hope the other boy is safe. He will be. I just got off the phone with the nurse and he's much better. Zion, however, has been quiet since he came into my office. This is my first time having him here and I know he's just as confused as I am because he's not an aggressive or troublemaking boy. I expressed my surprise to Mrs. Wilson as well. Although she reasons with him, she speculated that his quiet spirit could be because of the recent changes in his environment. Then she asked if things had changed over and I said yes. The change started a few weeks ago, and I thought he had adjusted to it very well. I was wrong. I apologized for the failure on my part and I apologized to Zion and promised I would do better. I asked if I could take Zion home for the rest of the day and the headmistress gave her consent. I got his bag and lunch box from his classroom and together we made our way out of the school. Good thing I had no homework to grade. I can dedicate my time to putting Zion through his homework. Then we would go over our moral code and do's and don'ts once again. These were essential. I had to make sure what happened today would never happen again. Then I get him ready for bed and take the opportunity to sleep early. All that plan flew out of my head when I approached the parking lot where my car was and before it stood Aaron Hart. Chapter 26. He stood in a blue shirt and trousers with his back to the car and his arms crossed over his chest, and I knew he was waiting for me. This was the wrongest time to meet up and the worst place to meet because things would be beyond my control. My heart squeezed in my chest at the sight of him, and our eyes locked. He had the same formal and blank look he'd had on his face when we interacted with each other at the university a few days ago. After almost a minute of a locked gaze, his eyes wandered from mine, traveling down to Zion, whose small hand I held onto. I could see the flicker of emotions in Aaron's eyes at the sight of him. These emotions ranged from surprise to confusion to a bit of pain and then anger. His teeth clenched and his breathing grew labored. I knew he knew at this moment Zion, my son, was his. It wasn't hard to guess. Zion was his father's son and had all his features, from his eyes to his smile and his face. My son barely looked like me and I knew Aaron realizing he was his would come as easy as breathing. He looked back up at me for the second time and he had a stormy look on his face, one that took my very being into a state of chaos. He wasn't happy. I didn't need the genius to tell me what that look meant. He knew the truth. He knew 5 years ago wasn't a fleeting moment like I had claimed to him many weeks ago. Something more than that happened, something I had kept away from him since then. The look on his face terrified me, and I swallowed shakily. In all the times I had known Aaron, I had never seen him as angry as he looked now and my brain stayed frozen, not knowing what to do or which way to go. Although a raging storm went off on the inside, I did my best to hold on to his gaze with the last will left in me. My worst nightmare just turned real and there was no escaping or taking me out of it. I didn't know how to respond, I didn't know how to act and so I stood muted, like a dumb being. He furrowed his brows at me. I think this meeting was long overdue, don't you think? His voice stayed low, but it held so much anger and restraint in them as he spoke. I bit down on my lower lips and dragged in a deep breath. I couldn't afford to have him go off on me here and now. Not while Zion was here and the look on his face showed he could not care less. He seemed pissed at me and I understood why, but this wasn't Zion's fault and there was no reason to drag him into the midst of the war about to unfold. He deserved none of that and should stay out of it. I doubt it, though. The war about to unfold was about him, and it would affect him one way or another. And I won't be able to protect him. My mind told me, and I groaned inwardly. I had played out all the scenarios in my head. I could jump to the defense and ask him what he was looking for or what he thought by following me down here. I could even ask why he was stalking me, but the cards were no longer in my hand. They were in his and he held the most important card, taking my son from me. We can't do this here. These were the only words I could come up with. Why? He challenged, stepping up towards me, and I knew he was past the point of reasoning. No one would win if we decide to fight this fire with fire. One of us had to be calm and understanding, and since I didn't have the luxury of being dramatic, I chose to be the calm one. Because he doesn't deserve to see that, I said, the he being Zion, our son. His hardened gaze softened for a moment before he spoke. What he doesn't deserve is you. My heart broke into a million pieces at his accusation. A part of me agreed with him and another part was just tired. Your issues are with me, Aaron, so let's sort it out without involving him. He growled under his breath, then meet me at the Vanity restaurant at 9 p.m. today. And gave no room for objection. I was supposed to take tonight and get a little rest. I didn't get that last night, but with the turn of today's events, it looked as if I wouldn't be getting the adequate amount of rest I need today either. The look on his face told me there was no room for debate. I bit my lips, knowing my back was against the wall, and I nodded. I will be there, I said, and he stepped away from before me, walking away and not bothering to look back. I opened the car and strapped Zion into the seat before going around and entering. I drove off and wished I could drive off to a faraway place where I would never have to see or confront Aaron ever again, but alas, I didn't have that luxury. There was no place on earth I could run to that he wouldn't find me. I knew that. I wanted to turn back the hand of the clock. I wished I could do that. Then I'd go back to a few hours ago and change the course of my actions. I'd make sure I'd do everything to keep this truth from being known. And now, I feared doing anything that would put me at risk of losing my son. I didn't know what waited ahead for me, but I knew it wasn't something good. I could feel it. My entire world was about to change, and there was nothing I could do about it. The more I thought about it, the more fear I have, and this fear wasn't going away soon. End of Part 2. Part 3, 8:30 p.m. I stared at myself in the mirror, taking in my reflection and wondering if how I looked was okay enough for my meet-up with Aaron Hart. I was in a black silk dress with a hollow chest that showed just about a hint of my cleavages. It has slim hands and left my shoulders bare. The outfits hugged every curve I had from up to down. It doubled in size after I had Zion, and though I thought it would leave in its time, it hadn't. I wasn't complaining. My dirty blonde hair I held up in a loose bun, letting a few curls fall onto my shoulders. I applied a little makeup and touched my lips with red lipstick and my lashes with black mascara. I needed to look my best, and though I felt as if this was too much, I reminded myself the man I was going to meet was Aaron Hart. He might have seemed like a normal man 5 years ago, but he was a businessman, a multimillionaire, and I didn't want to appear wretched before him. Tonight, however, wasn't about me, it was about Zion, our son, and what the stakes were now that he was back in my life, into his life. A lot was going to change, and I wanted to know firsthand what those changes would be like. With the change in my schedule, I had to hire a nanny to watch over Zion while I was away. I already scheduled the meeting to not be over 2 hours at most, and I pray to God that Aaron would be considerate in using the time for the meeting. I was a mother to a 4-year-old son, after all. Daniel asked if we could make plans for the night, but I told him I couldn't. I wanted to tell him how the events of today had turned bad, but I wanted to have the full story before revealing it to him. I also hadn't told Dia yet for the same reason. I packed my car in the parking lot, which was easier said than done because of the many cars already parked outside. The Vanity restaurant was one of the largest in the city and it had great ratings from what I've heard, but this was my first time coming here. I didn't know it had this much pull on people, but the environment was as warm and welcoming as the critics said. Aaron chose here, he must have liked it too. I stepped inside and I glanced at the massive restaurant hall which had much people seated around. My eyes trying to find Aaron from where I stood, but I didn't after a long while of a visual scan. A young male attendant approached me with a bright smile on his face and my attention settled on him. "Good evening and welcome to the Vanity Restaurant. Would you like a table or have you already made an order for one?" "I'm here to meet someone, Mr. Aaron Hart," I answered, and he nodded, knowing who I spoke about and beckoned that I followed him. I silently did, and he led me up the stairs to the executive floor, which had only but a few people present. It also appeared well organized and provided maximum privacy compared to the outer hall. I caught the sight of Aaron on the right side of the room, holding the menu in his hand and reading through it. His attention was keen as always and his brows furrowed. He was now in a blue suit that would have complemented his eyes if it were daytime. His hair was in a neat ponytail, which brought out his broad, handsome face. It didn't feel right that I wasn't on the same page with him. I spoke up to the attendant, "I have seen him, I can make my way from here, thank you." He smiled and nodded before taking his leave. I clutched hard on my purse and guided my legs towards him. I reached the table where he sat and I drew myself into the other empty chair to take my seat. "You're late," he said with a displeased tone, forcing me to glance at my wristwatch to see that indeed it was 5 minutes later than the time he gave. "I am here," I grumbled under my breath, but he heard because his head lifted from the menu he read and his hard gaze rested on me. I felt chills at his haughty stare and I adjusted in my seat as if I just had a bucket of ice water emptied on my head. This wasn't the side of Aaron I knew all those years. I knew the kind side, the gentle side, and so this side of him felt alien to me. "Well, you kept the existence of his son away from him for 4 years. If you're honest with yourself, you would admit you don't deserve to see that side either. And I will keep paying for the choice I made for the rest of my life." What a horrible life! I realized my response wasn't the best either. He was right. I was late and once again, I was in the wrong. "I'm sorry," I said, and I knew this won't be the last time I would use that line tonight. My apology was loud enough, but he behaved as if I said nothing. His gaze returned to the menu in his hand and after a while of me sitting at the table awkwardly, I spoke. "I'm here, just like you requested." He placed the menu in his hand down on the table and he folded his arms across his chest. "I want to know why," he said, his eyes leveling down on me. I knew what he wanted to know. He wanted to know why I cut him out of the first 5 years of his son's life. He wanted to know why I chose not to contact him after I found out I was pregnant with his baby. I opened my mouth to reply with all the words I had rehearsed on the way down here, but none of those reasons came out of my mouth. After a few seconds, my mouth snapped shut and my eyes dropped to the table. I fidgeted with my fingers, contemplating the words to say. I thought it was the best decision. There was no reason to involve you in my business. The last line must have triggered him because his eyes flickered. Except he isn't just your business. He's my son as much as he is yours, if not more. I stayed silent despite every fiber of my bones wanting me to rebel and tell him his last line was a lie, but I bit down on my tongue. I didn't want to upset this man. He seemed ready to bite off my head if the chance presented itself tonight. You denied me 5 years of being a part of his life. Now tell me why I shouldn't take him away from you. There was no reason he shouldn't, but I could not imagine a world without my son. It would be a dark and miserable one and I will not survive or want to live in it. It was a weekend together. I thought nothing would come of it, but it did. Understand there were a lot of things to consider. I barely knew you, and I had to make the decision all by myself. His teeth clenched at my words, and he shook his head. You could have told me when we met at the fundraiser. You could have come out with the truth. How did you want me to do that? Hello Aaron, I saw you came in today, but we have a son and he came out from the weekend we spent together over 4 years ago. Was that what you wanted me to say? I demanded. Yes, exactly like that. His response showed he saw nothing wrong with it. You had the last 3 weeks to come out with the truth, and you chose to keep it from me. There's no excuse. That is on you. I dragged a deep breath and rubbed my hand over my forehead. Then I'm sorry about everything. For not telling you about your son, and if there's a way to get on the same page about it, I want to hear it. He placed his hands down on the table and my eyes caught the file sitting on the table before him beside the menu. My gaze immediately narrowed, wondering what it was. I want my son. I want to be a part of his life. I want him to get to know me, his father. I do not want to get the lawyers involved and take him away from you, and so I had this drafted. He pushed the file towards me and I picked it up and read through it. It was a very detailed consenting agreement in which I would sign my right over to him. He didn't want 50%, he wanted 80%. I scoffed after reading through the terms stated in the document. He was pushing all the limits and my back was already against the wall. This is ridiculous. I slammed the file on the table and shoved it away from me. I felt anger turn within my being and I couldn't control it. How? He asked, as if he wasn't there when this got drafted. You literally just want to take him from me. I slammed, exhausted with trying to find reasons with him. It was obvious that would never work. He wanted to make me pay for my shortcoming and he was doing that. These terms didn't appear one made by someone who was being considerate, it appeared. He raised a challenging brow at me. Isn't that what you have done for 4 years? It's not. I insisted. I didn't know if you would accept him as yours or if you were just going to reject him. He had his life planned out. He seems to have found completeness with the woman he was searching for then, and a baby would have disrupted that. You took that choice from me and it was never your place to do that, he snapped at me for the very first time. I pressed my lips together, and now you're gonna pay me back in kind. That's not what this is, he argued. My eyes grew glassy, but I blinked them back. My heart was breaking, and I couldn't fathom the very thought of losing my son to this man. Then what is it? You're making demand for more times than I will have with my son. This is cruel. I do not deny you access to your son. He is still yours and you can still see him. Yes, but I'd have to get permission from you before doing everything. My son would no longer be mine but yours. Because he is mine. I didn't want to accept this offer, it was too cruel. A painful tear slid down my face and it burnt my skin. I quickly reached for it and wiped it off. You want to punish me, that's all you want to do. You want to take him from me, but you don't even know him or what he's like. And whose fault is that? Chapter 28. He said what? Dia exclaimed with a tone of disbelief. He offered to take over 80%, Dia. That was his most generous offer to me for hiding his son from him for over 4 years. I answered, watching her pace around my room as if it was her world that had just caught fire. As soon as I left the restaurant, I called Dia because I felt trapped and couldn't go home. It was past 10 at the night, but she answered the call and when I told her where I was, she came to get me. I couldn't even call and tell Daniel a thing because I didn't know where I'd begin. Daniel usually had his hand full of troubles to deal with troubles and I couldn't have it. I knew I'd have to soon, but for now, I needed Dia more. She brought me home and tried to console me while I sobbed my eyes out. She kept consoling me despite not knowing what had happened, and after I calmed down, she called Greg and told him she wouldn't come back home because she needed to be with me. Greg must have given in because she ended the call and didn't leave. She stayed with me, telling me it was going to be fine, and I remember that was the last thing I heard before falling asleep. I woke up with a still heavy heart and I busted out crying when the memories of last night rushed back into my head and I realized it wasn't a dream. That woke Dia up from the couch where she lay and she raced over to me. She hugged me, and I clung to her with the last of my strength. When I calmed down, she pulled away and asked for an explanation. Then I told her Aaron had found out about Zion yesterday and already made plans to take him away from me. I explained the terms he had stated in the agreement that he wanted me to sign. But this isn't fair. Zion has been your responsibility and you've taken much care of him and loved him all these years. You have dedicated your time to him and he's just going to sweep in and take him from you. He told me his terms were a generous proposal compared to what he would demand at court, but I was so furious I told him I was ready to see him in court, but I fear for the worst, Dia. What if we end up in court and he wins custody? I panicked, tears streaming down my face. The odds are already against me as it was. The odds were against me the moment I decided I was going to keep the baby and not inform him about it. Dia came and dropped to her knees before me. Always expect the best outcome in all situations. I wish it was that easy. Aaron had the power, resources, and ability to get himself the best lawyers for the case and they will win in the court of law without a sweat. I was doing well for myself in life, but it wasn't enough to go against Aaron Hart. I read up about the man, and his public image was impenetrable. He had the best of everything and he had never lost ever since he emerged into the public eyes over a decade ago. Staying optimistic now with all odds stacked against me wasn't a luxury I could afford. Perhaps I should have accepted his deal and become less involved in Zion's life. It would be nearly impossible to cope with, but at least I will still get to be with my son once in a while. Greg knows a few good lawyers. He could get in contact with them and explain your situation to them. They will know the best way to go about fighting the legal custody. She said. I opened my mouth to speak, but snapped it shut when I heard a loud horn coming from outside the house. It was still in the early hours of the morning, so whoever was out there was crazy or wanted to wake everyone up. This neighborhood was a calm one and so unnecessary noise wasn't something I heard often. The very moment my phone on the nightstand rang, and I turned my gaze to it, the caller ID was unknown and I ignored it. The call ended, and I turned to Dia, but my phone rang again and this time I picked it up. I'm at your door, Zara. Come and open it. Aaron's husky voice ordered over the phone, jumping over every formality that would have led to this point. My heart doubled in its beat and my weary eyes moved to Dia, who seemed to know what was up. How was I going to face him? How was I going to deal with this? Many questions ran through my head and I had no answer to them. I stayed silent, not saying anything. I know you're there and I know you're home. I'm not leaving here until I see and speak to my son. With that said, he ended the call. So he was the one honking the car and trying to wake the entire neighborhood up. I slid the phone down my face slowly, and my confused eyes stayed on Dia. He's outside, and he wants to see Zion. I bit my lips to stop them from trembling. You cannot meet him like this. You're all shaky and torn. Go to the bathroom and take a bath. Take as long as you like. If he is so ready to see his son, he'll have to wait. I nodded and got off my bed. I'll pick your clothes out. The last thing we will give him is the satisfaction that he's got you beat, she spoke with much optimism. I tried a smile, which didn't work out. Thank you. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.